Coming up next on Words and Numbers, executions in China,
losing spoons,
land acknowledgments,
and the economics of the Dark Ages.
All this and more coming up on Words and Numbers, a Civil original production. Check us out at civil.com. That's CIVL.com.
Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Anthony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
Ant? Well, Ant, let's break with tradition. I always ask what's new and exciting in your world. Always. But this time, Ant, I want to begin our little podcast with a land use acknowledgement.
Go for it.
We do hereby recognize that the British once owned the land upon which we stand and toil, and may exercise a legitimate claim thereupon. That's good enough because, that's all land acknowledgement nonsense always does.
Yeah,
we'll get back to that in a minute. Well, we'll get back to it in a minute. Don't.
No. All right. As long as we get back to it, because I've got a beef.
Yeah, I promise we're going to get back to it.
Okay. I have run across.
I still have to say it.
Go ahead.
What's new and exciting in your world this week, Ant?
Not new, but exciting. This is an academic article, and I swear I ran across this years ago, but I'd forgotten and just came back to it. Let me read you the title. This is a legitimate research article published in the National Library of Medicine, National Center for Biotechnology Information. Title of the article: The Case of the Disappearing Teaspoons, Longitudinal Cohort Study of the Displacement of Teaspoons in an Australian Research Institute. These guys get together.
All right, let me solve this mystery before it even gets out of hand. The teaspoons were in the coffee cups that they walked out of the break room with, stirring their various hot drinks, and they forgot to return them. That's my official guess.
They forgot to what?
To return them.
Yeah, so these guys are asking the question, why is it their teaspoons keep disappearing? So they get a set of 70 teaspoons, and they mark them in certain ways so they can identify which teaspoon is which, and put them about the research institute where they are. When I say put them about, I gather they didn't just lay them around. They put them in with the teaspoons that people use with their coffee, this sort of thing. And they monitor this over time. And they come to the conclusion that, first off, 80% of the teaspoons disappeared during the study. From that, based on how long it took, they determined the half-life of a teaspoon was 81 days. And that given all of that, at that rate, they would require an estimated 250 teaspoons a year just to maintain a practical institute-wide population of 70 teaspoons, given the disappearance.
These clowns
now,
have way too much time on their hands. Way too much time.
I found this incredibly amusing, and anyone who reads it would probably go the next step and say, well, this is ridiculous. It's a complete waste of resources. Why aren't you using the wooden stirrers? That's a very good question, except an economist would go the next step and say, okay, you can argue that the wooden stir sticks that you throw away, and you could say, well, you throw them away, but maybe they're recyclable. All right, granted all of that. But on the other side, there's these teaspoons. So you use the teaspoons and you're losing these things, and you've got to pay for new teaspoons, and they're metal, and there's resources involved there. But the stir sticks, those also use resources, and the recycling takes so much energy or whatever it is. And all of a sudden, you're left with what started out being a no-brainer of don't use teaspoons, use wooden stirrers, to something that raises a question. Well, which of these two things uses more resources? Not just more resources, but you have to consider the value of the resources that go into these two things. And this is the beauty of free market prices. Free market prices do all of that work for you. If, at the end of the day, it's more expensive for you to replace the metal teaspoons than it is to buy the disposable wooden stir things, then the wooden stir things, by definition, use less resources. Conversely, if the wooden stir things, because you throw them away, they're more costly than the spoons that, although they're reusable, you do lose them. If that's the case, then the wooden stir things are using more resources. And notice the absolute beauty of a price system. And again, I have to put the footnote, this is a price system in a free market environment. It does all of the calculations for you. You don't have to ask how much resources are being used, what's the cost of the resource, what's the trade-off. All you have to do is look at the price tag. The thing that's cheaper, that's the thing that uses less resources.
A great lesson. I agree completely. But you've buried the lead. Where did the spoons go?
Oh, people are just throwing them away.
Moving right along. Jesus. Anyway, I'm going to say something which I thought would never happen. I'm going to say something in favor of the present Chinese regime. Because, get this, they're executing people. I know that's not the surprising part. They are executing people who are committing online scams.
Really?
You can't kill these people fast enough, in my view. And I am, generally speaking, ambivalent at best about the death penalty. And yet, for online scammers, off to the gallows you should go. These are the lowest form of humanity. And they're even lower than you might think. Because first, the Chinese are executing people from Myanmar, which, isn't China. So there's that. So they're executing, from their perspective, foreigners for doing this nonsense. But come to find out, the people in Myanmar who are involved in these scams are kidnapping people and forcing them to work in these little scam factories that they've got. They brutalize them. They occasionally execute them. These are horrific people. Well, and their entire claim to fame is to get your grandfather to cough up his last bit of money because he thinks some woman he's never laid eyes on is in love with him.
Oh, so it's not a pay money to get your grandchild out of the slave labor.
They are running all kinds of scams.
Wow.
All kinds. But they are horrible people, and I don't think you can kill them fast enough. I really don't. And this is from a man who is at best ambivalent about the death penalty. Most days I walk around thinking that's something that probably neither we nor anyone else should do. But there are just certain subgroups of people, scammers being one of them, child molesters another, rapists a third. Right? I shed no tears. I mean, just none. You get yourself into this, maybe it's best that you can't get yourself out of it. But
and that's the hard thing, isn't it? Because I'm somewhat embarrassed that I'm not as morally outraged as what I'd hoped. However, my attitude changed when you started listing first the scammers, then the child molesters, then the rapists, and all of a sudden I saw a government adding 4, 5, 6, 10, 15, 20, and all of a sudden, jaywalking is subject to the death penalty.
Probably not jaywalking, but protesting sure is.
Right. Yep.
Yep. And I guess we'll just leave it at that, and people can ask whether I'm referring to the United States or Iran. Well, it's a mystery.
I'm Anthony Davies, co-host of Words and Numbers. James Harrigan and I are proud to be on Civil's network because we believe in their unifying principle of human respect, which is the idea that our well-being as humans is diminished when we employ coercion, and that conversely our happiness and prosperity are maximized when we cooperate. If you believe in our mission, join civil.com. That's CIVL.com.
This, of course, brings us to the foolishness of the week. And for the foolishness of the week, there's this dude, Stuart Regis. Have you ever heard of him yet?
No.
Yeah, most people haven't, unless you happen to work at the University of Washington, where Stuart Regis toils away as a professor. So he automatically has my sympathies, I guess would be the right word. And the University of Washington, like many, if not most, land-grant public institutions, is beside itself with guilt because it sits upon land that was once occupied by one native tribe or another. And at the University of Arizona, I was supposed to, I believe, read a land acknowledgment before a class and insert it on my syllabi, whatever. And, you know, we've all seen this nonsense, as a matter of fact. That's why I wanted to start today's episode with a land acknowledgement towards the British, who once occupied this fair area, you know. Or if we wanted, we could go back before that, the British, and find all the Indian tribes who occupied all the land. But then we would have to go back and find out who those tribes took it from. And we would have to then, after that, go back and find out who those tribes took it from. And before you know it, we're going to be reading land grant acknowledgments to dinosaurs who roamed the earth freely long before they were displaced.
I'm with you 100% there. What really irks me is these universities, that is typically universities, that will do this land grant acknowledgement. No, it's completely meaningless. You know why it's meaningless? Because if they meant it, they'd be tearing down their buildings and giving the land back.
That's exactly right. It's like, I can't even come up with an easy analog. This is just so stupid that it seems to be in a category of one. If you honestly believe this nonsense, give the land back and shut up. And I've always found, and I don't know if this has been your experience, the faculty who wring their hands the hardest about this sort of thing are exactly the same people who don't give to charity at all. Why not? Oh, that's for government to do. Well, look, either you have the courage of your convictions or you don't. And if you keep proving to me that you don't, up yours. It's plain and simple. But anyway, we haven't even got to the funny part yet. Because the funny part is that the University of Washington made their faculty include land grant land acknowledgement nonsense on their syllabi.
Wow.
And this one dude didn't use the university's preferred verbiage and instead wrote his own. And he wrote simply, "I acknowledge that by the labor theory of property, the Coast Salish people can claim historical ownership of almost none of the land currently occupied by the University of Washington."
Almost none of it.
Almost none of it. And he just went going and going and going. And he actually sued the university because his First Amendment rights were being violated when they told him he couldn't do that shit anymore.
Okay. So for our listeners who aren't up on the labor theory of value, his claim is that
this is the labor theory of property. So
of property.
It's different. It's different enough. Let's not muddy the waters. But we might do a whole episode on this. It's not a bad thing to do. But he sued and won. In Washington.
And won, yeah.
In the Ninth Circuit, he actually won a free speech case.
I don't know, James. This is great. But if I were the faculty member there and I were required to have that declaration in my syllabus, I think I would refuse to use the classroom because I had no right. In fact, the dean had no right to tell me I had to use the classroom. The students shouldn't be allowed in there. None of it belongs to us.
And moreover, we can't have class outside because that land is spoiled as well.
Right, yeah.
As a
And
matter
then,
of fact,
and then watch the university fall over itself saying, no, we didn't mean it.
yeah, but I mean, this is a question for I guess a evolutionary geologist. Would that be right? No, I'm not thinking about geology at all. Some sort of demographer, right? An evolutionary demographer. Is there any place in the United States, even 1 square inch of land, that has not been contested at one point? I wonder if there is. I mean,
I don't know,
maybe
but
the snowy parts of Alaska, maybe, but I bet they've been contended.
I don't know, but I do know that in my time as an adult, I bought 3 houses, and each time I've purchased property insurance, or I should say title insurance, just in case there was some problem somewhere along the chain of ownership going backward. But let me throw in here, neither one of us believes that, might makes right, and if you just take the land, it's yours. That's not it. We're not advocating any of that. What we are saying is that, look, at some point you just can't figure it out anymore. And to arbitrarily pick somebody along the chain of ownership and say that's the guy who actually owns it, well, it's arbitrary.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And even if you don't want to impute ownership, if you just want to say these people have a traditional claim on the land, which you and I might readily agree to, right? There are all kinds of people out there who might have traditional claims on lands. And that's especially true where I am in dusty Arizona, where I am almost surrounded by Indian reservations, right? But how far do we have to go, right? Because if I say the Tohono O'odham, which is a local tribe, if I say the Tohono O'odham have a traditional claim on the land, roughly that is Tucson, who had it before them and who had it before them? And what I'm really asking for is, who did they take it from? Right? Because everybody who ended up with it took it from somebody else. Until you can locate the first people who were just magically born here. And you can't, because that's not how people work. So, I don't know what to say about this. I'm incredibly interested in this guy's story. And I'm going to give him an email tonight and ask him if he wants to come on and talk all about it.
Oh, absolutely do. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great? But in case he says no, at least not him, but his ordeal made the foolishness of the week.
Our show Words and Numbers is a part of Civil's podcast network. Civil supports creators who embody the philosophy of human respect, which means embracing cooperation over coercion. We're committed to this mission, and if you are also, welcome home. Join us at civil.com. That's CIVL.com. Comedian, author, and political satirist Andrew Heaton joins us this week. Andrew is host of the podcast The Political Orphanage and the sci-fi deep dive podcast Alienating the Audience. He's a frequent contributor to Reason TV and hosted the popular web series Mostly Weekly.
Pretty nice guy, too.
Andrew, welcome back to Words and Numbers.
A pleasure to be back. I don't think I've been on the show since I was living in a cabin during the recession or during the pandemic. So it's good to be back on.
That is correct. That is
Well, not just that, but
correct.
we haven't dealt with you since you co-opted our fan base.
Yeah,
This was maybe a year or more ago, maybe 2 years. We had a Words and Numbers gathering of fans here in the Washington, D.C. area. And I was coming down with something, and I had to travel the next day, and I couldn't risk pushing it. And you came to the rescue. I said, well, can you host these guys? I never anticipated you'd actually co-opt the whole thing. So it was no longer Words and Numbers gathering. It was Heaton Mania or something.
It was Words and Heatons, and I absolutely threw you to the bus. 300 received for that. At first I kind of sowed doubt. I was like, everybody, Anthony's not here. It's not indictment. He's not been indicted. It's totally legal. And then later I was like, no, he's been indicted. It's all illegal stuff. He's on the lam right now. I think we took a video to that effect where I sent it to you and complained about you'd abandoned everybody. And it was really good. I'm not good at building my own audience, but my career path is what I call hermit crabbing my way to success. And I was able to do that day.
Well, Heaton, you'll be very happy to know that on Words and Numbers backstage, I think it was 2 days ago, a bunch of people said, and I quote, "You should have Andrew Heaton on," as if that has never once happened before. And so I assured them it would happen next week because they were so important to us that we would make this happen within days. So here we are.
Great. You guys are responsive to your loving fan base, and I am flattered that they would think of me.
They think of you more than they think of us, but hey, let's move on. When we were deciding to talk today, we asked you for, what you've been working on, some ideas you might have, and you sent back an email so full of crazy that I don't even know where to begin. But I think the interesting one, the fascinating one, the one that I really want to hear about is that you've been thinking and looking into economics in the Dark Ages.
This has been a hobby horse of mine for the last 2-3 years. And when I say economics of the Dark Ages, I'm really interested in how people thought about economics in the Dark Ages. So I'm not really talking about specifically how feudalism worked in terms of agriculture or the various rules and restrictions. That's all very interesting political economy. I'm very interested in how people approached economics in the Dark Ages. And the reason that I've become increasingly interested in that is I have a theory that I think I can back up, that the Dark Ages never really went away, that the default position for most people, if they don't know economics, is actually Dark Age thinking. And more to the point, I'm a fairly staunch anti-communist, and am old enough to remember the Soviet Union and still herald that as one of the great developments of mankind. But even then, when I'm arguing with people, it's very rarely that I'm actually arguing with them in modern America about nationalizing industries and having a top-down command economy run by a Soviet bureau. That, there's touches of that. But what I find more often is that it's these sort of unexamined presuppositions that have been left over from the Dark Ages. And so I keep telling people, and I think I'm right about this, when I'm arguing with a lot of my leftist friends, they're not the new guy. I'm the new guy. The ideas that were promulgated by the Enlightenment that are embodied in classical liberalism, those are the new ideas. The old ideas are the Dark Age ideas that we're still fighting, we're still arguing about, and I'd love to get into them.
And let's be clear, the Enlightenment was 300 to 400 years ago.
Yes.
It's not like this happened late last week.
Don't push people. Don't push people. They're coming along.
Yeah, they say that you all would have you've got more successful and longer careers than I have at this point. I am a congenital optimist, and I'm very sunny in my disposition, and I think my grandkids will have a better life than me, assuming that I eventually trick a woman into having children with me. And I'm generally very positively inclined. I see very little evidence, your audience notwithstanding, that people actually are learning economics or becoming more economically literate. And what worries me is I think the default state is one that comes naturally to us from evolution, that is contravened to the world we're living in, and that understanding economics has to be taught. And I don't see evidence that is widespread or getting better. I don't know. Do you share that same concern?
Yeah, although you put some interesting words to it. Now that I'm listening to you, I'm likening it to physics, that Newtonian physics, we understand it at an intuitive level. Quantum mechanics makes no sense to us. And yet when it comes to economics, more often than not, we're actually living in a quantum mechanics world.
Yeah. But
you got people, communist, socialist, what have you, bringing a Newtonian physics view to it, which may have worked. I shouldn't say may have worked. I'm sure it worked better when economies were much simpler, but it works much worse with complex economies.
So if we're just talking about Dark Age economics, I think there's really only one provision of Dark Age economics that I would even concede on that. And that is the idea that we live in a zero-sum world. So were we to go back to the Dark Ages where all wealth was land, they had a point. If somebody was wealthy, it was because they owned a lot of land and they took it from somebody else. And you could even go further back than that. The great Matt Ridley writes in his book, The Rational Optimist, about how the Roman Empire was an economy largely based on conquest and predation, as opposed to the blessed Carthaginians who were based on trade. So there's a whole period of classical antiquity followed by the Middle Ages where, accurately, the economy was such that if you were wealthy, it came at somebody else's expense. And I think that is an intuitive thing that is born into us because we've been around our species has been around about 300,000 years. When I was in high school, it was 200,000 years. Then we found like a shin bone in northern Africa. We now know we're 300,000 years old. Right. And for most of that history, if the three of us and Danny were in a tribe of 80 people and we went out and killed an elk and I ate more of that elk than you did, I got more calories. But now it's different. We got too many elks. We're getting fat. It's a different situation. And thank God capitalism came along and displaced feudalism. And we now live in a world where wealth can be created, where if I build a house and you pay me money for the house, we didn't exchange a limited amount of resources. We created resources and we grew the pie. But that's really the only mindset from the Middle Ages that temporarily I think was accurate.
Right. Feudalism is, I think, relatively easily explained, right? And because where do you find it? You find it in small land masses with a lot of people. So you're going to find it in the UK, England. You're going to find it in Japan, right? But the United States comes along. There's limitless land to the west. Feudalism never stood a chance here. But we just reelected a mercantilist president, right?
That's true.
Whose absolute first point is that someone always loses in a transaction, and it's not going to be me. And this does seem to resonate with people in a way that you would think it wouldn't, because if that were true, we'd all still be living in caves, and we're not. But nonetheless, it resonates with people quite significantly, and apparently always has. And I'm wondering, you use the word hardwired, which I think is fascinating. Do you think that's really hardwired into our humanity?
Yes. I think that the default position is one where human beings understand resources being limited. And that's something that was bred into us on an evolutionary basis. There are other things that you can see still work today. I don't know that they're directly applicable to economics, but just cognitively, we don't think in terms of actual numbers. We think in terms of proportion. So, which makes sense. If we're walking through an orchard in the prehistoric days, it was most useful for us to be able to look at a tree and see which tree had the most apples on it, not to know the number of apples on the tree. But it creates weird cognitive effects where, for example, let's say the three of us are going to go get sandwiches for lunch, and we're going to go get po' boys. And then Aunt says, "Oh, you know what? Actually, that place right there, there's sandwiches. They're identical. They're exactly the same. It's actually the brother of the chef. It's 3 blocks over, but it's $10 less." We'd probably go do that. But if the three of us were getting suits, we're each getting $1,000 suits. Let's say we're doing very well in this scenario. We're getting $1,000 suits, and then Aunt goes, "You know what? I actually know a tailor 3 blocks over. He's just as good. His brother is the brothers of this tailor, and he charges $10 less. So we could get suits for $990. Almost everybody, myself included, would go, "Nah, why bother? It's only $10." Because we're looking at the proportional thing. So I think that kind of thing's wired in, and I do think we have to get kind of an additional layer of tools that are put on top of that in order to think around it.
I think that seems to play as well with people's fixation on inequality. By the same token, so often when I have conversations with people who say, look, they're concerned about inequality in the United States, and I get them to acknowledge that there's a difference between inequality and poverty. And poverty is the real problem. Yep. And they'll say, yes, I can see that poverty is the real problem, except this guy has more money than I do. And they're back to that proportional comparison.
Yes, very much so. And I'm 100% on your camp on that one. I am concerned about the floor. I am not worried about the ceiling. I went to Sweden, Finland, and Norway over the summer, and I hung out with various people. And I'll say, like, the social system they have there seems to work very well. They get a lot of bang for their buck in terms of the high taxes that they're paying. And I want there to be a social safety net. So if the conversation is we're going to tax billionaires more in order to alleviate homelessness, I'm happy to engage in that. But that's taking money from a particular group for a specific problem, and we think the people that have money have more money, so we're going to do that. I don't have any ethical problem with that. That's a very different consideration than the people are poor because there are billionaires. And if we just get rid of the billionaires, then people will stop being poor, which I do think is a pretty medieval mindset. That
right. And it seems like envy's the actual problem.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's probably wired into us. And I think that there are little pieces of my brain that are missing. I don't really get sports. I wish I did. I think my life would be a lot more colorful and enjoyable. It seems to be
No, it wouldn't. It really wouldn't.
Anthony's an idiot. Pay no mind to him.
I have friends that sports is such a big part of their life, and they get to have a spirit to core, and I'm jealous. I think it would be great. I don't seem to have that part of the brain. I also just don't seem to. Maybe I'm doing so well right now I can't see it, and all of my peers are doing about equally well. So maybe it would change if all of my podcasting buddies suddenly became Joe Rogan level. Maybe it would really rankle me. But at the moment, I don't seem to have that as much. I'm concerned about actual poverty rather than the gap, and I'm concerned about relative growth more than I'm concerned about actual growth in terms of economics more than I am about relative growth. One of the mental models that I put forward when I talk to people about inequality is if you could push a button and it would double the amount of wealth everybody in the country had, their real wealth, not their nominal wealth, their real wealth, would you put the button? And everybody goes, yes. And I go, okay, that's great, but keep in mind, like, now I have 3 suits that look like I stole them from some British game show host, but like Warren Buffett now has $180 billion as opposed to $90 billion. And the inequality is significantly increased by this action, but we're all better off. I would absolutely take that deal. But a lot of people, when they think about it, they don't like it.
I can make it even better for you. John Rawls, who's a darling of the liberal left in political philosophy circles, had this thing called the difference principle. And he said that if we as a society were to do something, anything, that increased our wealth but did so disproportionately, even it would be perfectly just, even if the relative wealth of the very, very poor increased very little and the relative wealth of the very, very rich skyrocketed. As long as everybody's better off, it's perfectly acceptable, he says. Might be the only smart thing he ever said.
Right. Yeah, okay, good. I thought you were going to get me all riled up. No, I agree with that. If everybody's better off, good. Rising tide lifts all boats, all that kind of stuff. I'm here for that.
But to your example, it's going to be the case in almost every instance that thing that rises all boats is going to rise the boats on the right-hand side of the bell curve a lot more than on the left-hand side.
Yes, well, and it's also going to be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ant.
No, it is, but it largely has to do with the laws of statistics. It's the way income just naturally is distributed. That if you do what you're suggesting, you're going to get more on the top tail than the bottom. But I want to go back to James pointed out that, well, this isn't a concern about inequality. It's a concern or it's actually envy, which people get very riled up about. And I think he's right, and I think the proof there is very simple, that when people are concerned about inequality, they're never concerned about themselves having more than others. They're always concerned about others having more than themselves. And you could say, well, that's because, you've got Buffett and Gates and Musk and all of those who have billions of dollars, to which I respond, well, hang on. A poor person in America is richer than half the people on the planet. There's way more people poorer than the typical American than there are people who are richer. So if you're really concerned about inequality and it's not envy, start digging in your pockets and handing it out to poor people.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think one of the other factors that goes in that is part of this lingering dark age mentality that dovetails with that zero-sum thinking and the politics of envy, there's a radical departure that takes place in 1776 when the most important document in the modern era was written, which is, of course, The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, followed by the Declaration of Independence. But prior to Adam Smith and the Enlightenment, the universal belief in Europe amongst educated people was that, and it goes all the way through classical antiquity, it goes through the Roman Empire back to Plato, is that prices rise because of greed. Because in the Middle Ages in particular, they understood economics as a subset of theology, or possibly as a subset of ethics. And they therefore tried to understand things not in terms of systems, outcomes, and incentives, which is how we approach things in modern economics, but rather to think of it in terms of, are you being virtuous or are you being immoral? And so there was a presumption that prices go up because people are greedy, particularly merchants. In the Middle Ages and all the way back, everybody hated merchants. They were the most reviled class. You can go back and read, it's either Plato or Aristotle, I forget which one, but he talks about how in the ideal utopia, citizens would not be allowed to be merchants. And if they did it, they'd be jailed for bringing dishonor on their family. And Cicero talks about how merchants are vile. I mean, everybody accepted that merchants are not the predacious lords who are sucking the wealth out of everybody, not the bishops who are just the ecclesiastical lords, but the merchants who are probably the only people during the Dark Ages that are actually growing the pie in any meaningful sense. But there was an idea that prices rise because of greed, and therefore the way we combat poverty is by suppressing greed. If we want to make poverty go away, we have to cap prices, and we have to run greedy people out of town. Adam Smith comes along and goes, well, no, it's not that self-interest is corrosive and that it suppresses affluence. When you put it in a competitive market economy, I get money by selling you stuff. And I'm going to compete with James on how cheap I can sell everything. And so it ends up being a propulsive mechanism, which is a huge difference between Dark Age thinking and modern thinking. We think of self-interest as something that, one, is inevitable and baked into the human condition, and two, something that when you put it in a competitive economy is a good thing, because it is not from the, what is it? It's not from the generosity of the baker that he sells you your bread, but out of his own, whatever the quote is, right? Mm-hmm. That's a huge departure, and it's one that never went away. It's why there are still persistent calls today for price controls, rent caps, things like that. Mamdani, just elected in New York, one of his signature pieces is, we're going to put a cap on rent, and we're going to enforce this here. Well, why is rent going up? It's not supply and demand. It's that these greedy landlords keep raising the prices, which I guess means that my native state of Oklahoma is just far less greedy. That's the difference, is that Oklahomans are just pure of heart, and we're going to charge you for a 3-bedroom house $800 a month in Guthrie because we're just better people, and folks in New York are evil, and so the landlady that's renting out half of her duplex is just much, and I think that breaks down very rapidly, but it never went away.
And this is, unfortunately, this is something that we've got to relearn every generation. It seems like every generation we're back at zero again. And then over the course of 20 years, people come to realize, oh yes, that economics is not a zero-sum game, and no, businesses didn't suddenly discover that they could be greedy in 2022. They were, if they were greedy before. If they weren't before. It has nothing to do with greed.
Yeah, it's that old trope that I think is accurate. Like blaming rising prices on greed is like blaming air crashes on gravity. Like it's right. Like this is a given. And again, it's a good thing in a market economy for people to want to make money because they go out and do more stuff.
And we're so quick to point to businesses being greedy because they want more money, but nobody points to consumers being greedy because they want to pay less, right? Yeah. We applaud that. Oh, look, I found a deal on this. Well, good for you. Well, why isn't that greedy?
No one applauds the government for taking more in some instances than businesses have on their bottom line.
Yeah.
They're not greedy.
Even then, I'm getting into some real supposition here because I can't talk to any medieval people. But in the episode that I recently did on the Political Orphanage, entitled "I Went Back in Time to Talk to Drunks About How People Thought About Economics in the Middle Ages," the conceit of the episode is that I literally time traveled to 1282 to talk to people about what they think of economics, and then I wind up going forward a little bit, and I talked to a priest, and actually there is actual theories that were intellectual theories during the Middle Ages, but when we go back there and look at it, I think it would not have been crazy for the priest I'm talking to go, well, you know what we ought to do is we ought to just take the clerisy, because, priests aren't in it for the money. They're public servants. They're there to be there as stewards of the community and for mankind. They're highly educated. And we should just put them in charge of stuff. Like they could dictate what prices should be. And you don't need to worry about it because they're afraid of going to hell. Therefore, they will always be in good behavior. And then you flash forward to now, well, we don't even have the fear of hell to stop people from doing that. So why would, if you can't count on the Catholic Church in the Dark Ages to restrain its own corruption or incompetency for fear of going to hell for all eternity, why would you, and I'm not even saying that public servants are bad. I'm just saying, why would you assume that they're inoculated if that period of time didn't work?
I am saying public servants are bad. I say it all the time. I mean it right down to my core.
Civil is on a mission to host ideas that will lead humanity to an abundant future. Civil is a streaming platform with apps on TV and mobile. Watch shows, films, and debates and be part of an emerging community of people who believe we can innovate beyond our legacy system built on coercion and zero-sum politics. Join Civil and let's build a new era of prosperity together. Learn more at civil.com. That's CIVL.com.
The other bit that I think goes along with this idea that prices rise because of greed, and this is something that is part of the theoretical construct of the Middle Ages, in the same way that Adam Smith and the Enlightenments, the core of economics for classical liberals, and we can add in Bastiat and various other characters to it as well. The main thinker during the Middle Ages is Thomas Aquinas when it comes to economics. He's the guy that people are keying off of. Now, I'm not a Catholic, and I don't know Catholic theology terribly well, so he might have been great in terms of theology. I don't know. I don't mean to cast stones at him theologically, but he promulgated the idea called just price theory. And this was the main doctrine of the Middle Ages. And the idea of just price theory was that prophets are inherently they're inherently suspicious. Prophets are inherently suspicious, and that it is immoral for anybody to make excessive profits. That the moral thing everyone must be constrained by, both personally and by law, is that you do a thing and you recover the costs of the thing you did. You built a house, you charge someone for the materials that you used to build the house, and then you take a modest addition to that for your own living, and then you stop. So if I build a house for you two, you're living in a duplex in the Middle Ages, I can charge you for the wood, and I can charge you a reasonable salary. But if I were to make a 20% profit on the house, that's not okay. That is immoral and unacceptable to do. And I think you see that as well today, where I have friends, when you talk to them, it's like I'm talking to Thomas Aquinas, where they will say, we shouldn't have a society where people earn money for something other than labor. People should only be paid for that which they do. It's immoral to have money derived from unearned non-labor income, and excessive profits are evil. Corporations that make too much profits are bad. There should be caps on how much profit they can make. But what would happen if you do that? If you were to put a cap on how much profit I can make as a podcaster, you know what? I would suddenly find a lot more episodes to do abroad at interesting locations, so that I could just write them off of my profit margin would go down, but suddenly I would do a lot more cool stuff. I would just do less podcasts, one of the two. But that idea that profits are suspect and high profits are immoral, this is straight up inarguably the intellectual doctrine of the Dark Ages, and it never went away.
Oh, it's not just the Dark Ages. I mean, Pope Francis was much more aligned with Thomas Aquinas than he was Adam Smith. James and I have written about him many times.
They were both much more aligned with Karl Marx than damn near anybody else.
And this is a very, very smart guy who just went completely off the rails when it comes to economics.
This is the Platonic problem, or the Socratic problem, right? People who are very, very good at one thing naturally assume that they're very, very good at everything. But the interesting thing with this nonsense, Andrew, is I've had those same conversations with people who I consider friends, and they will tell me repeatedly that ExxonMobil should never make a huge profit. And my rejoinder is, what about Apple? Is that okay? And for some reason, that's always okay.
Yeah, because we like Apple and we hate oil.
And there's something very deep underneath that realization, right? There are corporations that we can't stand, And they tend to be things, they tend to produce things that we absolutely must have. And then there are corporations that we love, and they tend to produce things that are luxury purchases.
Whenever any of my friends bring up multinational corporations, and for some reason multinational is brought up as a horrible thing, the idea that there'd be, I don't know why, because they tend to like foreigners, the people that I'm talking about. What is multinational corporation, though? And I immediately go, like IKEA? Like that's the first thing I say, like IKEA? Because that's a multinational corporation. Those are Swedes you're dealing with. And they're like, well, not really that one, because it's cute and I like it, and I don't know what their profit margin is. And then to your point on the Pope, that one is not surprising to me at all. And I don't even, it makes sense because you're trying to approach economics as a subset of theology, which is literally what they did in the Dark Ages. That's exactly what they did. And I'm not surprised that somebody trained in theology that doesn't have a background in economics would naturally do that. But I don't think that the Bible is an economic text. I'm no longer religious. I used to be very religious. And it would be crazy if I were an electrician and I tried to wire your house based on my interpretation of the Bible. I think anybody rational would go, the Bible really doesn't have a lot to say about electrons and protons. Like it has things to say about how you comport yourself in terms of your interactions with other people and your interpersonal ethics. You can have that. But when we get into economics, we're talking about something else. But it's not surprising to me that the previous Pope would view it as you should not be avaricious. You should not be greedy. You should just do things out of the good of your heart. And on that note, it would be wonderful if people did all sorts of great things out of the goodness of their heart. I'm a big fan of charity. I'm a big fan of generosity, but it doesn't tend to scale terribly well. And if somebody's not going to do something out of the goodness of their heart, which I applaud, then we're left with two options. We either force them to do it through threat of imprisonment or fines, or they make a buck off of it. And society just seems to work a lot better when people are incentivized to provide goods and services because it's in their self-interest than to punish them if they fail to do the thing we're going to do. That's just a less efficient way of doing things.
I have to come to the rescue of the papacy a little bit here, because there is a recent pope who actually did get economics pretty right, despite the fact that when he talked about it, he was talking about it from a moral perspective, and that's John Paul II. Perhaps not coincidentally, the guy who grew up under communism.
Yeah.
He understands how economics should work.
That makes a lot of sense.
At all. Not coincidentally at all.
One more reason to like John Paul II. I've always liked that guy, so I'm going to add that to my quiver of favorite pope.
Yeah, he's got a great quote which people only quote half of it, and he says something. I'm going to butcher it, but he says something to the effect of the landlord should not exploit the renter. And that's the part people quote. But then, I don't even think it's a period. I think it's a semicolon. And the renter should not exploit the landlord. Which, to an economist, I read that as, he's talking about a free market price.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things, and I couldn't find this, there might have been nascent ideas of supply and demand in the Dark Ages. I would be very surprised if merchants didn't have some idea that when demand goes up, they can charge more and that kind of thing. But I find that a kind of continuation of this thought process that we're still dealing with today is the idea that supply and demand is optional and that we should restrict it when it's something truly important. And the rejoinder I always have is supply and demand is not optional. You can't wish it away. You can't make it go away by fiat. That's like trying to change the weight on your scale by capping the scale, or trying to lower the temperature in your room by adjusting the numbers on the thermostat. You can't do that. And I have this conversation with people all the time where they'll say like, I understand why you like markets, but for something truly important like housing, we can't leave it to supply and demand. And I go, this isn't a situation where I'm just fetishizing markets so hard that I want to apply supply and demand, and I believe it's modular, and I can pick which sector it affects. It's always there. Now, the government can get in and say it's going to increase the supply of houses. They sort of do that in Singapore, the way they do it. It can increase the demand side by providing subsidies. Or like when we get to food, we could talk about like food stamps. That's the government subsidizing the demand side. So, and I'm there for that. Again, I want a social safety net, but you can't get away from the equation itself. You can just adjust the players on the teeter-totter, but you can't get rid of the teeter-totter. The supply and demand's always there.
Now, you can also hide it.
To this.
Governments are great at transforming prices into pain. And they'll claim that, well, they've controlled the price. No, all they've done is they've hidden it. The pain's being felt over here or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Ant and I come into this every single time there's a natural disaster of any kind. And the price of generators goes up and the price of gas goes up. And look, either the price goes up and people regulate what they consume, or the price stays the same and the first guy in line gets all of it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And that one is a hard sell. Like I've had conversations. I spent a lot of time in Scotland. And I love the Scots. I say this as an associate Scot. They're kind of Venezuela in tweed in their orientation economically. They like to think of themselves as Scandinavians, and I wish they would spend more time over there because I don't think they've got the actual same economic process going on. They're more of the Chavez camp than I'd like. And I've had conversations about that. Of there should be what are they called? Greed law. I can't remember the term here, but when you put a moratorium on people charging more for gas during
you're talking about price cap, right?
That's it. Price gouging laws.
Anti-gouging laws.
Yes, I did talk to somebody who at least I thought was very honest, where I explained it to her. I went through all that, and you're going to get, you can either have no gas that costs very little, or you can have more gas that costs more. That to me is not a hard one. And she went, I would rather not have the gas and be taken advantage of than have the gas and be taken advantage of. And I went, well, that is your call. I do not want to inflict that perspective onto other people. And certain times I would agree with you where like, I don't know, I'm going to catch a plane or something and the airlines are just horrible. And maybe I'd rather take a train because you guys are assholes. Like maybe so, but it's still overall going to be ameliorative to just let the prices work.
But see, the thing is, if she wants to not have the gas and not be taken advantage of, she has that option. Just don't buy the gas. Stay home.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh.
There's one more thing, and then I think I've hit all my major points in terms of dark age thinking. And this is more mindset than economics specifically, although it applies to economics. And that is that today we tend to, particularly economists tend to look at economies as incentive structures, and we look at problems as systemic issues. So right now with housing, I would say 80 to 90% of the housing problem we've got in this country is that we restrict supply, and that if we were to remove the caps on supply, prices would go down. We've seen that in Austin, Texas, where I was living up until a couple of years ago. They changed the laws in Austin, Texas to make it easier to build housing, and then prices went down. But that's a very modern way of looking at it, of a series of levers that you push, and stuff goes up and stuff goes down. And a way of approaching this, say during the 2008 recession, would be to go, okay, the government was incentivizing bankers to take on subprime applicants, and that created this very large pool of people that actually couldn't pay back the money, and so on and so forth. In the Dark Ages, I think overwhelmingly people approach things not systemically, but on an agentic basis. And what I mean by that is, systemic, I think that's kind of straightforward. There's a system, we're looking at incentives. Agentic thinking is the idea that if something bad happens, it's because there is a specific personal agent who is responsible for it and needs to be stopped and brought to justice. So when I was working on the Hill, right at the tail end of the Great Recession, so many people would call in and go, who is responsible for this that should go to jail? There's got to be some guy in a corporation that we can put behind bars for this catastrophe. And, I couldn't really, one, I didn't have economic training at the time, and two, it wasn't my job to espouse my opinion. I was there as a vox for the member of Congress. But the reality was, look, we had a really dumb system in place. And yes, there were people that took advantage of it. And if they committed fraud or they did something illegal, they should deal with the consequences of it. But the reality is, it's not that the economy was fine and then 7 bad dudes wrecked everything. In the same way that if we were to go back to the Dark Ages, if you were to talk to people about crop failure, which was persistent, there were 2 phenomena going on. There was one, a really, really unproductive system that existed. They had the commons, where, at least in England and in Scotland, where you'd have the village allocate the farmland on a regular basis every year, every few years, based on how many people were in the family, which is a very fair and egalitarian way of doing it. But if you know that the land is going to be reapportioned every so often, you don't have a lot of incentive to take time out of your already miserable, backbreaking day to drain a swamp and add land to it, because you're not going to get the payoff from it. And there's lots of other things like that, but it was a very unproductive system. And then on top of that, you get like the Little Ice Age that starts in the year 1300, goes to about the year 1800, where it's just cooler and the growing season's shorter. And you have droughts and you have rainy seasons. And these are just things that make agriculture not work well. But the way people would approach it was, there's a drought. There has to be a person responsible for this. Therefore, there's got to be a witch somewhere in our county that used probably her black magic in order to inflict this on us. So we've got to find the witch and we've got to kill her. And I find this when I talk to people today, where they want to find the bad guy. Find the bad guy, stop the bad guy. Spot the bad guy, stop the bad guy. And we're going to play whack-a-mole with the bad actor, and that's going to fix the system. Whereas I think modernity goes, no, we've got a incentive structure in place. We have to make sure the incentives are good to arrive at an optimum outcome.
I refer to all of this as the mysterious dude issue, right? There's always some mysterious dude who's causing a problem. But let's not also forget, Heaton, that the primary tool in the Middle Ages against famine was prayer. Not terribly effective. Not terribly effective. Pray all you want.
We've got
but
pretty
that's
good
not gonna
empirical
make
data
it
on
rain.
that too, James. Like it's, I have a lot of religious friends, and I used to be religious, and I don't want to crap on anybody, but the Dark Ages were, if nothing else, religious. I don't think anybody would debate that. And Christianity was more front and center back then, and prayer was a lot more common. And we've got a lot more food today, so they do seem to be orthogonal to one another.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I can tell you from personal experience that when I went to Catholic high school, I prayed daily for the affections of Marianne Christodolfo, and she never came near me. I doubt to this day she even knows who I was.
How do you know what she was praying for?
Well, it wasn't for me, that's for sure. I'll tell
James,
you that for nothing.
I want to send my kids to Catholic school because all the people that I know that have come out of Catholic school are atheists that really love sex, and I want that for my children.
there is that, and I don't think they allow beating in them anymore.
Oh, good.
I had some unique punishments laid on me in Catholic school. Unique, let's call it. The most unique was they used to keep a jar of dried peas on a desk. And when you had been especially naughty in the eyes of God and all of his earthly representatives, they would drop a hand in that, pull out a handful, throw them on the floor, and you got to kneel on them. And you knelt on those peas until they told you felt badly enough. Didn't matter if you cried or not. You were going to do some time.
Huh. Yeah, I could do without that.
It sucked. I'm sure it did suck. Not because, of course, that would never happen to me. But there you go. All right, so Andrew, let me play us out with one last question for you, and it's probably a deeply unfair question. And if it's so, you can kind of wave it off with your hand. I won't take any offense at all.
I'm a quarter politician, James. I can sidestep if I need to.
Yeah, I was just trying to make myself look nice. It had nothing to do with you. Anyway, dealing with the Dark Ages is phenomenally difficult, right? You run into the problem of a lack of sources. Primary sources seem almost not to exist at all. How did you do it? How'd you go digging through this stuff? Where were your big finds that you did? Because nobody expects big finds, right? What were the huge things you found, and where did you find them? And what did you expect you could have found but didn't?
That's a great question. Some of it is supposition, but I think it's pretty sound, like agentic thinking. Just the way people dealt with calamities by finding somebody and bringing them to justice, I think is I fairly self-evident. So I feel like I'm on good footing for that, even if I don't have direct quotes for it. I did do an episode, a bonus episode that was a corollary to that episode called The Economics of Witch Hunting, where I did get into it, where a huge amount of witch killings took place in Europe between 1550 and 1800, which is actually kind of late in the game if you think about it. And so I was able to find sources on that in terms of how people approach things. But in terms of the other stuff, Thomas Aquinas was probably the best and key thing to go off of, because that's an actual educated, erudite thinker who could give voice to these positions and either was summarizing what was already on the ground, or alternately became the intellectual linchpin of everything that was to follow. So I think he was there. One of the other things too is just going through. I really enjoy reading history, and I found these little nuggets that I've stored at the back of my mind over time, where I would go, that's really interesting. Like I found, okay, here's a quote from Cicero. He said that retail commerce is sordidus, or vile, because merchants, exact quote, would not make any profit unless they lied constantly, end quote. The philosopher Aristotle wrote, in the city that is the most finely governed, the citizens should not live a vulgar or merchant's way of life, for the sort of that way of life is ignoble and contrary to virtue. And Plato, when he wrote about his ideal society, would not be one where the guardians of it owned private property, because he thought the ownership of private property would incentivize people to fight over what they owned, and therefore citizens of the city would not engage in commerce and trade. So I found lots of things like that. But the main thing, though, is I'd say Thomas Aquinas, because we can at least go, there's a thing called just price theory. You can look up articles on it. You can look up quotes of it. And that's a thing where I can point to a specific intellectual construct that was there, and I would argue still is today.
And if our listeners want to go look for that, it's in the Summa Theologica. And trust me, you don't want to read the entire Summa Theologica looking for this. So helpful publishers have pulled out the questions on law, and you can find it there. Nice and simple 80 page book.
Or I'll if I might plug myself for a moment.
Of course.
If you want a more entertaining version, and I think I'm pretty safe in saying that, say what you will about me, I am funnier than Thomas Aquinas. I'm sure he's a better person than me, everything else, but
by orders of magnitude, you're
I'm a lot funnier than him.
Aquinas.
I did, in the most recent episode I did on the Political Orphanage, I did two things. The first half is me just talking to randos, blacksmith, bartender, farmer, that kind of thing. And then I kind of do some meta where I'm like, I'm doing a straw man argument here because I'm talking to the uneducated rubes of the Dark Ages. At one point, I'm literally arguing with a scarecrow. So I am fighting straw men. And then I spend about 40 minutes where I really tried to come up with an articulate intellectual defense of just price theory and the thinking of the Middle Ages. So if you were to listen to that episode, there's a character, Father Richard, who's in the latter half, who I think is a succinct and eloquent and more entertaining version of Thomas Aquinas and is keying off of him. And that's on my show, The Political Orphanage.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you, Andrew. This has been wonderful.
Perfect place to end.
My pleasure. Good to be back on the show. Thanks, guys.
If you like Words and Numbers, check out civil.com/wordsandnumbers and join Civil to get access to films, shows, and live events for those who are interested in upgrading civilization by innovating beyond our legacy systems. Get Civil's apps on TV and mobile. Learn more at civil.com. That's CIVL.com.